Bonjour tout le monde. During my last video, my Meganium solo of Heart Gold, I made the offhand comment that Ice was my favorite Pokemon type. This got me a couple of responses over on my blog, asking me to clarify why it's my favorite type, and further, which of the Ice Pokemon are my personal favorites. So I decided that since we still have a few days before the Sinnoh remakes come out, and I had a little bit of free time, I could just do a quick little off-the-cuff tier list for you guys right here, where, for one of the first times ever, I don't even have a script, I'm just kind of talking through this, but I do think that's standard for tier list. Anyway, as for why it's my favorite type, the short answer is that I live in the subtropics. New Orleans is not a great climate. About 8 months out of the year, it's kind of like walking into a dirty, overheated sauna whenever you go outside, and it is just unbearable, sweat-drenched hell on earth. And so winter, like the months between about like mid-November, right about now, until maybe March or April if we're really lucky, is basically the only time when we can kind of pretend that this area is fit for human habitation without air conditioning. Also, because of that, winter is New Orleans' social season. Not only do we have Noel and the New Year, but of course we have Carnival, which lasts all the way until February or early March, and which culminates in Mardi Gras, which is probably what you know it as. So I associate the cold and winter with both the strange and the exotic because I really haven't seen snow much in my life or like heavy ice or anything like that, but also just having, the best time of the year to get away from the blistering hell that is Louisiana summer into just things that are fun and refreshing, and I can actually wear nice clothes instead of, just having everything covered in sweat. Louisiana sucks. But anyway, yes, so that's why I like ice types so much. It's a combination of just me having a lot of positive feelings associated with winter and just the exotic nature of it to me. And that's even despite the fact that it's not a really good Pokemon type. Pretty much everyone knows that defensively it's awful, and offensively it's kind of been passed over in recent generations because of other things like fairies existing. But I still like it a lot. I always have ever since Gen 1, and so I guess I'll do a quick little tier list saying which of the ice types I most enjoy and are most likely to put on my team when I'm making one. Now, another obnoxious thing about ice types is that they tend to come on the back half of most games, which I don't really understand. Like, it's a naturally occurring phenomena. I don't know why most ice types are locked past like the 6th gym in most games. But they are, and that makes it hard to build teams centered around them. But that's just kind of something you have to learn to live with if you enjoy the type. So, anyway, on the screen I have all of the final form ice types. I'm counting like all the families together, so I'm not like counting the unevolved ones, and I'm listing like megas and other forms with the final form type just for simplification purposes. And even so, there's a fair number to get through, but not that many. According to Bulbapedia, Ice is actually the rarest type, which again is a little weird to me. I would think that Game Freak would have more ideas for ice Pokemon than something more unusual and otherworldly like Ghost or Dragon, but yet here we are. So anyway, I have them listed in National Dex order, except the regional forms. I put them down in the generation they actually appeared in because I feel like that's more appropriate. So let's just get started from the top, which is, of course, Dugong. I don't think Dugong is terribly interesting. I don't think it ever has been. It was outshined as a water ice type, even in its first generation, and it's just not very interestingly designed. I think the Seal line is one that people point to when they say that Gen 1 did not always have particularly creative designs. And like, it's not as bad as like Grimer or Voltorb, but it's definitely down there. It's pretty, but again, it's surpassed by so many others, and even by some of the later ones that kind of took the same concept and did more with it. So I'm going to put this down in D tier. Cloister is one of the water ice types that I think surpasses it because it does have like a very tanky niche, which makes sense. It's an oyster. Um, and I think they've done some things with it involving like multi-hit attacks, like the ability Skill Link. I don't play a lot of competitive, so that's not really my focus here, but I'm at least aware of competitive. It's an alright design. Um, I'm not really sure why its face is just a black ball. Like, as someone who really enjoys oysters, because Louisiana oysters are amazing, that is not what the inside of an oyster looks like at all. I mean, it doesn't even look like a pearl because it's black. I mean, black pearls exist, but they're pretty rare, as far as I know. I'm not a pearl expert. But anyway, I will go ahead and put that in B tier, where I like it, but it's not enough to really get into the top 2 tiers. Jinx. Jinx is difficult to discuss, I think. Because it's been over 20 years, and I don't think anyone can really pin down exactly what Jinx is supposed to be, and for the perspective of this tier list, why it's an ice type in the first place. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding it, and I kind of feel like Jinx has been left behind in the past because of it. Like, it's nominally part of a trio with Electabuzz and Magmar, but they got evolutions in Gen 4, and Jinx did not. And now even there's a Galarian regional form of a humanoid Ice Psychic type from Gen 1 that is not Jinx. So at the same time, it's a Psychic type, and Psychic was amazing in Gen 1, but it's kind of been on a slow decline to where now it's just pretty mediocre. I do still think it's not a terrible concept. I mean, it's the only ice type in Gen 1 that's not weak to electric, and it had the advantages of being a psychic type and just kind of generally being fast and having a pretty fast sleep move. That was pretty good. I'm gonna kind of put it in, I think I'm gonna put it in C tier because again, there's more creativity on display here than Dugong, but it's just got so much working against it, especially now, that I don't want to put it any higher. Lapras. Lapras is probably one of my favorites. Not quite my favorite, but it's definitely an A tier. I think despite the one you get in-game in Gen 1 being really underleveled, I think, aside from that, it really shows off what water ice can be in terms of like a tanky, bulky water that also hits the potential offense of the ice side. And it's just kind of a general lovely, serene Pokemon. I think that kind of captures the aesthetic vibe of what ice can do. Also, I know it got a fairly interesting Gigantamax form in Sword and Shield, but as we'll talk about later on down, I'm not super familiar with those games. But I'm glad it got something. It didn't get a Mega, but it got that. And it's just like, it's probably, like, as listed here, I think it's the best of the Gen 1 water ice types by a fair margin. However, I definitely have to put Articuno in S. I'm not going to just hide from this. Articuno is my favorite Pokemon. It always has been. I just love that. I just love the aesthetic. It was pretty powerful, at least in Gen 1, back when Blizzard was 90% accurate, and you could really take advantage of the high special, but it got nerfed pretty hard after that. And it's just, I mean, it's a legendary, so it kind of has that little extra story oomph even back then, and even now when it's thoroughly mediocre, I really appreciated the icy glow up that the Seafoam Islands got in the Let's Go games, along with Articuno itself being there. I am disappointed that its Galarian form loses its ice typing, so I can't mention it here. I kind of wish that the Galarian legendary birds lost their flying types and got their new ones, making Galarian Articuno would be psychic ice in that case. I think that would have been more interesting. It would have given us a unique type in Galarian Zapdos, which would then be electric fighting. But it's what we got, so the Cantonian Articuno is definitely still an S rank for me, even if it's mediocre now. It's just has always been my favorite. I just really enjoy the design and the just what you can do with it in game. By contrast, we have Deli Bird, which is also ice flying, but is completely on the opposite end of the scale. It has to go in E tier. Deli Bird is a gimmick Pokemon. It's a penguin that's dressed up like Père Noël and throws presents. And it's none of most gimmick Pokemon are not very good, and this one is just awful. I mean, the typing is bad. Present is a bad gimmick move. Stats are bad. There's just, and it's not even terribly cute. Which is just a shame, especially because it's the only Gen 2 Pokemon on this list, because the actual good Gen 2 Ice types got evolutions later on. So, yeah, sorry Deli Bird, you kind of suck. And joining you in E tier will be Castform's Hail form, or I think it's called Snowy form or something like that. I think this barely qualifies as an Ice type, because Castform is just another gimmick Pokemon, except this one changes types. And it in itself is mediocre and uninteresting, but it also reminds me of just how underwhelming hail is compared to the other weather effects, which disappoints me. Like, I know that since Gen 3 and when Castform came out, like, they've done more with hail, mostly through abilities and Aurora Veil, but it's still not as good as the other three, and that makes me sad. Oh well. Glalie. Glalie is odd, definitely. Normally, when you think of Pokemon with perfectly even stat distributions, they're either certain mythicals like Mew and Celebi, or really bad gimmick ones like Ditto and I think Spinda. But Glalie kind of sits awkwardly in the middle of those two things, while not being terribly great, or I'm not even really sure. I've heard it described as like a hockey mask, and I don't follow hockey. I feel like I would have to ask my Quebecois friends about that, but I just don't really see the appeal here. And even worse, there are only 2 Ice type Mega Evolutions, and Glalie of all things got one of them. At least that kind of gave it some statistical distinction, and I believe also Refrigerate, the ability. But it's still not terribly good. I'm putting it in D tier. Okay, so Walrein. You remember how I said about Dugong, how I think other Pokemon have taken that same concept and done more with it? I was mostly talking about Walrein. It does seem like the Sphealine was Game Freak's second attempt at the same thing. They don't look as plain, and I think they do more to distinguish themselves in combat and just as Pokemon in general. I feel like it belongs in B, because again, it's not a personal favorite, but I like that they put more effort into it. Now, on to Regice. I remember back when Gen 3 came out, I was more interested in Regice than I am now. And I think that's because back then, mono ice types were genuine novelties. And Glalie is one, sure, but it's not great. So Regice was a lot more interesting to me, and I'm just, nowadays, maybe because it's, I don't know, I've never really been into the Regis as a concept. They're not terribly interesting to me. They're just artificial constructs made of these particular materials, and they don't even have faces, and it's just kind of weird. Apparently not everyone agrees with me, because there are, I believe, 2 new ones in Sword and Shield. But, yeah, I'm gonna put this one in C, because it's, I mean, it's alright. It's just not my favorite or anything terribly interesting to me. Abomasnow. Interesting typing, not great for weaknesses and all that, but definitely interesting, and I like that I associate it with Snow Warning because I believe it was the first Pokemon to have Snow Warning. And, even if Hail isn't great, that's something very distinctive that it can say about itself. I'm putting it in A just because, again, I really like Ice Grass. It's a typing that you don't think would work all that well, but I think in certain contexts, in the context of like using it to hit really hard with one of its two stabs before it gets murdered by a single fire attack or whatever, I think it's good in that context, and also setting up Hail, of course. Um, I may use an Abomasnow in my upcoming run of Brilliant Diamond, and I'm thinking either that or Weavile down here. Weavile, I'm also putting in A. Sneasel was just kind of an afterthought, but Weavile really takes the concept of, well, ice types are terrible defensively. Why don't we just make a glass cannon out of it? And that works really well because a fast, offensively oriented ice type actually kind of plays around the type's weaknesses pretty well and works to its strengths, which is that, ice hits a lot of things super effectively. I'm less up on dark types, so this is, I'm kind of meh on this particular type combination, but other than that, I think it works well, and I'm glad that Sneasel got a much appreciated evolution here. Glaceon. The evolutions are not my particular favorites in any way. I don't find them as fascinating as some people do, and for Glaceon in particular, it kind of feels overshadowed by the existence of Vaporeon because Vaporeon was there 3 generations earlier and had ice coverage like most water types do, and pulls off the tanky thing better because water is actually a good defensive type. So Glaceon feels kind of redundant as a result. I'm not really a fan of its design. I'm gonna go with C tier. It's kind of mediocre. Mamoswine. Now, I do remember when Gen 2 came out, and then they introduced the Swine line, I thought it was an interesting idea because back in Gen 1, every ice type except Jinx was weak to electric. So you could use that to run through the ice type Elite Four member Lorelei with an electric type, even though ice itself is not weak to electric. So I thought that making a line that was immune to electric was interesting, but then as I showed off in my Meganium solo, it still has a grass weakness, and I was able to one-hit KO all of Price's team with Magical Leaf Meganium, of all things. So it kind of furthered the impression that ice types were just a variant of water, and an inferior variant at that. So I feel like I'm being harsh on the Swine line, but it is quite good at what it does. I mean, Ice and Ground is a strong offensive combination, and I do distinctly remember Mamoswine in X and Y because there's that route where the snow is so deep that you have to ride on a Mamoswine to get around, and I just thought that was a clever little integration of Pokemon into the world, kind of like Lapras being a ride Pokemon in Sun and Moon, I believe. So yeah, it's not high enough to go A, but I will go B for it. I do think its face, the face of this line always looks goofy in all 3 levels. I'm not quite sure what to do with it. Anyway, Frostless. Frostless is... I don't really get the cultural reference behind Frostless. I know it's based on, it's one of quite a few Pokemon that are based on Japanese spirits, but aside from that, I really enjoy it as a Pokemon. Ghost is another one of my favorite types, and this is the only Ice Ghost type. And as an evolution to Snorunt, its leagues better than Glalie in basically every way. So Frostless is definitely going up here for the creativity, and the novelty of it, and also being pretty good on its own terms. So there's that. Rotom Frost. Rotom Frost, it's interesting that it comes at the end of the Gen 4 ice types because it wasn't actually an ice type until Gen 5, so it's a nice transition between them. Rotom Frost, I'm gonna kind of put in the middle. It's a haunted refrigerator. I mean, I don't have much attachment to Rotom from Gen 7, so they're basically just appliances. And while that is somewhat clever, it's not really enough for me to go terribly high with it. But on the subject of mundane-inspired ice types, we are now in Gen 5, which is kind of infamous for that. Vanilluxe, or I guess you would probably say Vanilluxe in English, it's the one that gets the most flack because it's an ice cream sundae, but I do like it. It's at least a B. The reasoning for that is because it is fairly strong from what I remember, and it can put in some work, but also because in, I think, the original Black and White, it is available before the 5th gym in that cold storage area, which is weirdly early for an ice type. And I think I said at the beginning, I wish that there were more ice types available earlier in the game, but it's nice that there's at least one, and it's kind of cute in a goofy little way, so it can go in B tier. Beartic, I'm less in love with. It's just kind of an unimpressive polar bear Pokemon. They didn't really do much with this concept. I am also reminded of a friend who normally likes bear Pokemon. He thinks they're cute, and also because he is a gay bear, so it kind of has an association there. He really does not like Beartic's pre-evolved form Cubchoo because it has a frozen snot icicle coming out of its nose, which he thinks is really gross. I've never thought of it that way before. I know that snot bubbles are like a Japanese media thing, but I can see how that's like off-putting for some people, and it's just, again, then they kind of turn into a little beard with Beartic, but if anything, that's even grosser in a way, more gross. So I'm not in love with Beartic. No. Triagonal. It's a snowflake. Again, Gen 5 is not the most inspired with some of these designs. But on the other hand, I kind of want to say that they were just getting easy concept ice types out that probably should have been in the game from like Gen 1 because, a sentient snowflake is pretty basic, or an ice cream cone, or a polar bear, or something like that. So I'm going to put this in C. I don't like it as much as Vanilluxe, but definitely more than Beartic, and it kind of has that same frail glass cannon, but not quite fast enough, I think, to really distinguish it like Weavile does. So it kind of goes in the middle. Kyurem. Kyurem is... The first word that comes to mind when I think of Kyurem is over-designed, especially when you get to its hybrid forms or fusion forms with Reshiram and Zekrom. I would have preferred that Kyurem changed type when it fused with them, and then maybe it lost its dragon typing and became either Ice Fire or Ice Electric. I think that would have been more interesting. Maybe not as good competitively, I'm not sure. But, and just, at least, I do remember it having a decent story role in Black 2 and White 2, but I haven't played those games in years, and again, over-designed, and I feel like at this point, we were reaching the point, I think, probably around Gen 4, so when Box Legendaries started to get that way, and it was becoming very noticeable. But, I mean, still not a bad concept, but I just wish they'd maybe done a bit more with it, with the fusions and all that. On to Gen 6, which I have a soft spot for, beginning with Aurorus. Aurorus is definitely going in A tier. It's kind of like Lapras and it has that serene beauty to it, But I also associate Aurorus with some of the more interesting changes or additions that were made to the Ice type in Gen 6. Like Refrigerate, the ability, or Freeze Dry, which I think is the only move still that like completely changes how the type chart works. So I thought that was a clever concept, and even though Aurorus is not the only Pokemon to learn Freeze Dry, even in Gen 6, it still has that association for me. So it's definitely going in A tier, easily the best thing that they've done that I think that has ever been done with a fossil Pokemon. I'm generally not too much into those, but again, really great concept, and kind of reflects the attempt to revitalize the Ice type in Gen 6, which is a lot more than I can say for Avalugg. Avalugg is just not worth much mentioning. It's just an iceberg, and it's slow and tanky on a type that it can't effectively be slow or tanky because it's defensively awful. Wolfric in X and Y is another one of those embarrassingly bad Ice type gym leaders, and I believe this is his ace Pokemon, or at least he definitely has it on his team, and I think that just says all that you need to know on my feelings on Avalugg, and on Wolfric for that matter. Okay, so now we have two Alolan forms of Gen 1 Pokemon. Sandslash on paper seems like it would be really interesting. Ice Steel is a unique typing, and Steel is not one of my favorites. I definitely think it has potential in places. But I think in practice it falls apart just because Steel, being an amazing defensive typing, cannot prop up Ice, and in fact they kind of drag each other down. It's 4 times weak to fighting and fire. And also, it's competing, and in both games that these two have appeared in, it's competing against Alolan Ninetales because they're version exclusives with one another. And I definitely prefer Alolan Ninetales, as I'm going to talk about in a second. So this one can't go any higher than B tier. Sorry, Sandslash. Alolan Ninetales, though, is going up in S tier with Articuno. Part of that is just because I really enjoy fairy types as well, but I just think that it even more so than Lapras and Aurorus, it captures the aesthetic of what Ice has the potential to be, and even in the fact that it rides on aesthetic more than combat potential. But also Ice Fairy is just a really good offensive combination. I have used this in both Sun and Moon and Let's Go, and it's very helpful as long as you keep it safe. And the Vulpix line was one of my favorite fire types. I'm not super into fire types, but it's up there. But then giving it this Ice type revitalization and just made it even better. In my opinion, it is definitely an S tier for me, and it's kind of sad that we may not get Alolan forms in many future games. I hope we do, but it doesn't seem like they're carrying a lot of the regional forms over. Anyway, on to the one actual new Ice type in Gen 7. Crabominable is just, abominable, pun intended. It looks silly, it's slow, it has a very late evolution. I've heard that's a little better in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I haven't played those. And it's a crab, which, I mean, I like crabs on my, I like crabs as a dish. I don't really like crabs as like living animals. And it just kind of looks ridiculous again. So it's got to go in D tier. Like Alolan Pokemon have the reputation of being slow, and that just really hurts the Ice type because, as I mentioned with Avalugg, Ice can't do slow and be good. Okay, we are finally on to Gen 8, and here is where I talk about the fact that I have not actually played Sword and Shield. it's on my to-do list, but I feel like it's always been getting pushed back because there's always been other games that I've been more interested in, and I know that Sword and Shield are not terribly well regarded. They seem like they're going through that sort of Zelda cycle of getting a lot of praise now because everyone's dunking on Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. But I don't know how much of that is really genuine, or that's just, like I said, like the Zelda cycle of where you always hate the new thing and hold up the previous new thing as this hidden gem. So I don't have direct experience with any of these, so I'm just going to have to go off my impressions of them. Galarian Darmanitan is, well, I've seen some amazing things about it because it has an ability that's basically a choice item. And it also has Zen mode where it goes into Ice Fire, which is quite the typing. I'm not sure if I would try it out myself, just because the Darumaka line has never particularly interested me in either of its versions. But I will put it at B because it does seem to have a lot of creativity behind it. Ditto Mr. Rhyme, the ice psychic tap dancing mime. I think it's gotta go in B, right? That's just such an odd concept, but it seems like it would be fun to play around. And it's kind of what I mentioned about Jinx, how Jinx has been left behind in the past, and now we have Mr. Rhyme instead. So it just kind of has to go above Jinx. Frostmoth. As far as bug types go, Snom and Frostmoth are fairly cute, but I'm still not in love with them, and I feel like if I'm going to play something that is going to get obliterated in one hit by any fire move, I would rather be something like Obama Snow. So Frostmoth is going to go in C tier. Same thing for Ice Q. Ice Q is cute and weird, and it's kind of funny to me that it took them this long to have like a very basic ice type penguin Pokemon. But the gimmick behind it is just it doesn't seem like it would be terribly useful if Ice Q itself is not that great, and it also feels like it's cribbing a bit from Mimikyu in Alola. So again, I'm putting this one down in C tier. It's not one that interests me much. These two, however, do interest me more than I gotta remember what these are. Arctozolt and Arctivish. Like, my god, these things look weird. And I get that that's the point, that the Galarian fossils are a play on paleontologists incorrectly assembling fossils and making these Frankenstein's monster creatures, basically. Like, that's the joke with them, but they just look so strange, and like, Arctivish's head is upside down, like, that's so, ugh. And neither of them are unique typings either. Like, I would definitely take Rotom Frost or basically any water ice type over Arctivish. I'm sorry, it's good for a one-off joke, but why are there 4 of these? Ugh. And then finally we have the Legendaries of the Crown Tundra, or at least the 2 that are ice types. Glostrier, and I believe this is Calyrex Ice Rider, or whatever it's called. I'm gonna put them both in B. In B, I would be interested in trying them out. And as I mentioned with Frostless, Ghost is another one of the types that I really like, so I feel like I would have a lot of trouble picking which of the 2 forms of Calyrex I would prefer. Between, what's the other one called? Spectrier or something like that? Anyway, but yeah, these 4 are in my I might try them out in Sword and Shield. These 2 less so, and then God no. So that's it. That is the end of my tier list, I guess. I don't this was a completely off-the-cuff project, so just if you have any comments, if you also enjoy ice types at all, if you have opinions on the tiers that I put them in, obviously this is purely my own thoughts. So if you have different favorites, or if you really like the Galarian fossils or Deli Bird or something, feel free to comment down below, and of course like and subscribe if you enjoy my content. As I did mention, in my last video, I'm going to be doing like a first impression video of Brilliant Diamond when that comes out on Friday. It'll probably be available like later in the weekend after I've had a bit of time with the game. But aside from that, yeah, just like, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I will talk to you guys later. Au revoir.